From mushrooms to wine. Yes, so today we're making a mushroom wine. So I know that might throw some people off at the very beginning, however I have made mushroom wines before. I'll put the links in the description. I've also made mushroom mead. I like brewing with mushrooms, and I think it's something every home brewer should try at least once. It gives such an incredible umami, different flavor to a brew than you might even imagine. It tastes more like a crisp white wine than anything else. It is not going to turn out like a wine flavored with mushrooms, even though that sounds counterintuitive, I know. But it's really good. For this recipe, you are going to need and those are my ingredients for my advanced mushroom wine. It's a combination of fresh and dried mushrooms that are going to work incredibly well together. However, use what you have at your disposal. If you cannot get dried mushrooms, that's okay. If you can't get the same varietals of mushrooms that I used, that's okay. The importance is seeing how these will flavor your brew. So you're going to want to cook your mushrooms down. It's just important. Not the dried ones, but anything that was fresh. Once you cut it up, you want to make sure you cook it down. That's going to really extract all that umami flavor. And the point is to get a little bit of color on them and get some of the moisture out of them. You want to save that moisture and add it to the fermenting vessel, but it just helps the process go and creates the flavors you're looking for. You could do this in several ways, and they are all perfectly fine. You can take a standard pan. Now, no oil. You don't want any oil because any oil you put in the pan will end up in the wine. And nobody wants to drink oily wine. If the mushroom starts sticking to the pan, you could add a little water along the way, and that will stop the sticking and basically deglaze the bottom. You can also get a baking sheet. Put all the mushrooms on the baking sheet and bake them. Just until you start to get some color, they shrink a little bit. That's what you're looking for. That's also acceptable. I'm personally going to air fry my mushrooms today. So what I'm going to do is put them in 2 batches into my air fryer and cook them at one of the higher settings, maybe 390, for about 10 minutes. Stirring them every 2 to 3 minutes to make sure that they're not cooking unevenly. And I'm going to put them onto one of these parchment papers, which is going to collect any juices that come out, so I can make sure everything ends up in my brew. Once all your mushrooms are cooked, we can actually just start to assemble. The cooking of the mushrooms is probably the hardest step, but it's also critical. Again, we're trying to get that umami flavor out of the mushrooms. Mushroom wine is a little different than your typical fruit wine. I like to think the mushrooms you put in are more like oaking a wine, where the yeast is going to go in and out of that oak and extract flavors and color. That's very similar to what they're going to do with the mushrooms, but it's not going to be a mushroom flavor. I think it's important because if you don't like mushrooms, you're probably not going to want to try this. Or if you just, mushrooms are okay, that might be like an off-putting thing. I'm telling you, this wine is fantastic. It's something you should try. Now, the thing is that, just like anything else, there are so many different types of mushrooms out there. Depending on what mushrooms you use will change the final result of the wine you make. And you might find that, let's say, cremini mushrooms aren't your favorite, but oyster mushrooms are, or vice versa. So that's why I'm using 4 different kinds of mushrooms in today's wine. So first, I like to add the sugar. For today, I'm using turbinado sugar, but you can also use demerara sugar. Those are the 2 I recommend. Now, if you have a hard time finding either, you can just use plain white sugar, or you can sub all the sugar out for honey, and then it would be a mushroom mead, which I also have made before. Now, these are not the same as brown sugar, or, dark brown sugar, light brown sugar, that kind of stuff. That has molasses in it. This is just a raw cane sugar with a larger crystal. I find it gives a good flavor and color to the wine, which is why I like using it. However, if you're having a hard time finding it, or you don't want to order online, or you just want to go a little bit cheaper with the recipe, white sugar works just fine. It also helps. It also helps if you get packaging that's the exact amount you need for the brew. You know, it just saves trouble on weighing everything. But it's not a big deal. Now, I'm using a little bit of honey. This is only a pound of honey in this recipe. I really liked the mushroom mead and like the combination of honey and mushroom. Again, completely optional. You can 100% just use white table sugar and this recipe will work just fine. These are a little bit, let's say, adjuncts you could add to improve and give more depth of flavor to the final product. And if your honey is not coming out, just use a little bit of water. You know, more like room temperature water, something not ice cold, and it should just get the rest of the honey right to the sides of the walls. Now all your sugar's in, the next thing you want to do is add all your mushrooms. Now, and try to get everything, like, there's going to be some liquid from cooking the mushrooms, all that stuff. You want all that to actually end up in the brew. Besides adding fresh mushrooms today that have been cooked down, we're going to add a little bit of dried mushroom. Now, that's just for a little bit more depth of flavor, a little bit more complexity in your final brew. Again, if you can't find dried mushroom, you could just use all fresh. If you can't find all the varieties I use what you can find. I mean, you can literally just take white button mushrooms and cook them down and make wine out of it, and it's going to be good. But the more into it you get, the more in depth you get, the more fun you could have, experimenting, trying different things out. And that's the whole point of this, isn't it? I'm also going to add a little bit of dried orange peel. You can use fresh. I just happen to have some dried, and there's not really a big difference in the final product. Just easier. Like, that's it. I'm also going to add a little bit of wine tannin and yeast nutrient as per manufacturer's instructions. We now want to add some water and really just enough to mix it around. In case I haven't said it by this point, I just want to remind everybody that anything that's touching your brew should be sanitized. The vessel, the hydrometer, the bowls you're keeping stuff in, the spoon. Very important to sanitize your equipment before using it. You don't want anything getting in your brew that you don't want in your brew. Now it's easier to mix if you don't have it filled all the way with water. However, you want there to be enough water in there for all the sugar to dissolve into it. The mushrooms are also going to really help because they kind of break everything up as you're swirling them. And this is a good chance to get a little bit of oxygen into your brew. You need to get a little bit of oxygen at the beginning. It really helps the yeast colony take off. Once you're good and mixed, we're going to add in the rest of the water. Now, you want to get a little greedy here because the mushrooms are not only just going to absorb some of the liquid, but they're also going to take up a lot of room. And we're looking to get a full gallon of product out at the end. So I go a little bit higher than I normally would. However, you do want to leave enough room that in case this takes off, and this is going to take off, when it starts to bubble up, you don't want any mushrooms to block your airlock and possibly cause something bad to happen. I think that's a good amount of volume right there. So now I'm going to give it a couple more good stirs, and then we're going to take a reading. We're looking at a 1.115. So that's a very respectable gravity. If this goes dry, that's going to give us about that in gravity, which is respectable. It's going to be a good number. And for that, I'm using Lalvin 71B today, which has a 16% tolerance, which is more than enough to really help us get to the finish line with this brew. We're going to use a whole packet. Just cut the top, sprinkle right on top of everything. Alright, so now everything is in. Only thing left to do is cover. Add your airlock and clean up. So what happens next? We're going to let this sit. In my experience, mushroom wine goes really quick. Something about all the mushrooms, I guess the nutrients in them, really just help the yeast thrive. So it typically takes off a little bit sooner and finishes a little bit sooner. So I'm going to check this in about 10 days. We're going to check this in about 10 days. If it's completely dry and done, great, we'll move it into secondary. If not, it might need a little bit more time than that. I am in a time of year where it is getting a little bit cooler in my place, and that does make my brews go a little bit slower. But that's just the way brews are. I can't really rush them. They're going to take the time that they need. And we're just here to kind of watch and help them along. Anyway, that's all I have for today's video. If you guys want to see part 2, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, do something to interact with the video so it lets you know when my next videos come up. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns about today's video, please leave them below. I'd be more than happy to answer anything. Until next time, guys, I'm Phil. This is Phil with Facts, and have a great day.